let's see. When we ran out of tape, just previously, on the previous record, I was telling you about the games we played in front of the newsagent's shop window. I think I told you that it was called First and Last Letter. I don't know just how much I got onto the last tape, but that's what it was called, the First and Last Letter. And of course there was all the sweets, boxes of sweets and jars of sweets and the different things in the shop window, and they all had the labels on. And the game was that one of us would have the job of looking at these, and we would, in our mind, we would take into consideration the first and last letter of any particular word that we could see in the window. And then we used to tell the rest of the gang that what the first and last letters were, and it was their job to look in the window and see any word where this first and last letter fitted in. And once they'd done that, the one who managed to spy the right word, then it was his turn. And we used to play that, we could play it for hours on end on a winter night when it was dark and there was nothing to do. But those were just one idea of the kind of things we used to do in the winter nights. Of course, there was always the Band of Hope, which was held every Monday, and there was, later on, there was the Boys' Brigade. But that didn't start till, I should think I must have been about 9 years of age when the Boys' Brigade started. But anyway, it was really called the Boys' Life Brigade, because the main thing we learned was how to save life. We learned St. John's ambulance methods, and the half of the evening when we went to the Boys' Brigade meeting was taken up by learning how to bandage up and how to carry people away on a stretcher drill they called it, and all that sort of thing, how to revive people who'd been gassed, or, all, more or less very much like the same thing I suppose they learn today at St. John's Ambulance. But in addition to that, of course, we used to learn marching, forming fours and all this sort of stuff you'd learn if you're in the army. And we also had a bugle band. And it was a marvellous thing to march behind this bugle band. If you got a good bugle band, you didn't have to fancy yourself march along the street behind it. And another thing we did was Indian club swinging. Of course, that was good for the development of the body. And another thing was that we learned semaphore flag signalling. It was quite a useful thing, and we learned quite a lot. And I know I was, I should think I was in it till I was about 16 years of age. And by that time, I'd been in the bugle band myself. I was a bugler, and I finished up as a corporal. But then, at about 16 years of age, when the first war started, because most of the boys and the young officers who took us had joined up. When I say most of the boys, I mean the older boys, those that were about 17 and 18, that all joined up. So the thing fell through, and it was never started again. But another thing that we used to do when I was in the Boys' Brigade was that once a year in Prescott there used to be what they call the Prescott Carnival. It was usually held on Whit Monday, and at this carnival, in addition to sports and all the kind of things you get at a carnival, there was also the May Queen, and this May Queen, she was of course chosen from all the girls in the district, schoolgirls they had to be, and on that day, the one who was the May Queen, she sat in a carriage with her attendants, not a motor car like today, but the old horse and carriage, you know, sat there in style. And I remember that we, as the Boys' Brigade, were a kind of an escort. We used to walk at either side of the carriage, suppose kind of guarding her. But that was one aspect of what we did at the carnival. And then another thing was that we used to give demonstrations of our first aid work as well. At this particular carnival, we'd set up what looked like the winding gear of a coal mine, and then one of the Boys' Brigade officers would set off one of these cannons, as they call them, that you let off on Guy Fawkes night, one of these that makes a big bang, and flame would shoot out, and the idea was that an explosion had occurred below ground in the mine. And of course we rushed up with our stretchers and brought all the injured men out and started to bandage them up for all the different things. And another time, for a change, we had a house on fire, and we rescued people from this burning house. Of course, it wasn't a real house, it was just made of cardboard and with a wooden frame. But anyway, we did the same thing there. We went in and rescued people from the house, brought them down and bandaged them up, put them on the stretcher and carted them off. It was all very interesting and good fun as well. And at the same time, we were learning to be of some use in that sort of thing in the future, because for right up to the last war, I never forgot what I learned in this St John's ambulance. But just before we started with the Boys' Brigade, one of the things that took up quite a large part of my spare time was that I became a paper boy. And I started at the early age of 8 years. There was 2 of us used to do the round at first. Well, when I say there was 2 of us used to do the round, there was only one did the morning round, because the morning round wasn't as big as the evening round. The evening round was the local papers, the Liverpool Echo and Express. Of course, there was more ordinary people used to buy those, and we had a bigger round to do, so it took 2 boys to do them. But when I first started, I just started doing the evening round. But the fellow the other lad who did it was about 10 years of age, and of course I was under his charge. I had to do what he told me. But after about 6 months, he gave up the job, and I took over his job, and we had another boy came on to do the evening round with me. And of course, I was in charge. Well, I'd really got my hands full now because I had to do the morning round as well. And to give you some idea of what doing a morning round in those days was like, my father used to start work at 6 o'clock in the morning. That was quite usual for a lot of men, started so early in those days. And as he was, just before he was going out, he'd only about 10 minutes to walk to work, but just before he went out, he used to shout me, wake me up, and I used to have to get up because I had to be at Rainhill Station, which was 3/4 of a mile walk, by 6:20, because they didn't bring the papers to the newsagent shops in those days. They came by train. And I had to be at Rainhill Station when this train came in at 6:20 in the morning. And the guard would just sling the bundle of papers out. They were all wrapped up and tied with some string. He'd just sling them out onto the platform. Well, I had to be there when the train came in, because if it happened to be a wet morning and he just slung them onto the platform, they'd be all wet through by the time I got there, and then I'd be in trouble. But anyway, I used to have a truck. You call it a truck, or we used to call it a barrow. But actually, what it was a box, and it was stuck on top of a couple of pram wheels. It had got handles so that you could push it. And of course you had to push this truck, and I had to push this truck to the station. And then when the bundle of newspapers came, I always had a pocket knife which had to cut the string and put the papers into this barrow. And then in the morning, all the way back from the station to the shop, I would be delivering the papers to the various customers, and I didn't have the number or the address or anything written out on the paper like the newsboys do today. I knew I had to know all my customers by heart, and I used to have to deliver these each morning on my way back to the newsagent's shop. Well, when I got back to the newsagent's shop, I would take what was left of the papers out of the truck and take them into the shop, and then I'd got to go beyond the shop to as far as a place called the Dragon, which was on the way to Prescott, about half a mile further on from the Old. And I'd got to do that round then. And incidentally, there was a big hospital just outside the Old, near the Dragon. Now, the Dragon got its name from the fact that there were nearly all Welsh people there, Welsh miners. Of course, you've heard of the Welsh Dragon, and the place became called the Dragon because they were all Welsh, and there was a pub called the Green Dragon. But anyway, that apart, I'd got to deliver, there was at this hospital, just over the brow as we called it, I used to go there, and I wasn't allowed in the hospital. I'd got to go to the entrance, and there were certain people had a morning paper, and I used to take them to the entrance to the hospital, and the porter used to take them from me, and then I suppose he'd deliver them inside the hospital. And then I got to go to the nurse's home, where that was on the other side of the road, and deliver morning papers there. And then I'd got a few other places to go to. But anyway, by the time I got back and finished my round, it was 8 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd got to have my breakfast when I got back, and have a wash and clean my boots, you always had to go to school with clean boots, and it was hard work cleaning boots in those days with the old dubbing, as they called it. It took a lot of polishing, I can tell you, and especially if your boots were wet. Anyway, I got to clean my boots, and then off to school, which was in Rainhill village. That was another 3/4 of a mile walk. So I could just about manage to get there by 9 o'clock when the school opened. And well, that was the morning side. Well, I'd got the same thing to do again at night. But not only had I got to see to my own round, but this boy who went with me, who was under my tutelage, as you might call it, or under my orders anyway, I'd give him enough papers. I knew all the different customers that we had in Rainhill, and he'd got to do the Rainhill round, and I'd got to do the same as I did in the morning. Then I'd got to go back to the shop and deliver the evening papers on the way back to the shop. There was a big difference though in those days. Not only because you had all these papers, and you had to open the bundle before ever you got to the newsagent shop, you were allowed to sell them, so that anybody could come up to you and ask for an evening, say, if they wanted a Liverpool Echo or Liverpool Express, and they cost 8 each in those days, and you could sell them as you went along to whoever wanted to buy them, in addition to your regular orders. And you'd all that, you'd a lot of responsibility. Anyway, I'd got the same round to do at night as I'd in the morning. And that used to take me till about 7 o'clock. So it was 7 o'clock before I was free to do anything in the way of going out and playing or joining in anything, even going to the Band of Hope. Luckily, that's only started at 7 o'clock. And a lot of the Boys' Brigade and things like that, they didn't start till 7 o'clock, so I was able to get to things like that. But in addition to going on this evening and morning and evening round, I'd also got to do special rounds with the weekend papers on a Saturday. I used to have to take the morning papers out first, and then go back to the newsagent shop to Mrs. Townsend, and on Saturday morning, because we'd got to do more deliveries after breakfast, she used to give us our breakfast. And then after breakfast, after we'd had a breakfast, we used to set out again a second time, delivering Liverpool Weekly Post and Liverpool Courier and such, all these magazines, Home Chat and Home, all the different women's magazines, and the weekly papers that come out, some come out like sporting papers for men and all that sort. But we used to have to do that on a Saturday. And when we used to do the Dragon round, and of course it was a much bigger, a wider round, delivering all these weekend papers on a Saturday. And it would take us from after breakfast to nearly dinner time just doing the Dragon round. Then we got to have a dinner and start on the Rainhill round. And it would be 3 o'clock in the afternoon before we'd finished. But in winter, on a Saturday, because of football and things like that, and they had to wait for the football results coming through to the papers, the train didn't come deliver them till 6 o'clock on a Saturday. So from 3 o'clock to 6 free on a Saturday, and then I got to do the Saturday round, the evening round, and we always sold a lot more papers on Saturday because there used to be men stood outside the station, these who backed football coupons, and they were anxious to see how they'd gone on, and they'd be waiting round the station, and we could sell them very quickly on Saturday evening, and of course we used to sell more than double the number of an ordinary night. But and then we hadn't finished then even. One thing that I didn't like doing was we had to go on Sunday morning and deliver the Sunday papers, and they came in at 8 o'clock. On the 8 o'clock train, so I'd got to be there on a Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd got to, we used to go wider afield even with Sunday papers, round to outlying farms and places like that too we didn't go to with the ordinary papers, and it used to take me till about 12 o'clock on a Sunday morning to complete my deliveries. And of course it meant I had to miss Sunday school and church, and particularly Sunday school. It meant that I had no chance of getting a prize. You see, you'd got to get a prize, you'd got to get 90 marks. Of course, the highest possible, of course, was twice 52, because there was morning and afternoon, and you got a mark for each, and you got to get at least 90 marks to get a third prize, and you got to get the full 104. That meant not missing one school to get a first prize. But anyway, I had won a third prize now and again, and I didn't like having to miss losing this prize, because at that time there wasn't much to read for children, and it wasn't till later that the Sunday school itself started a library, because there was no local libraries like there is today. The only library that there was sometimes in the town, like in Prescott. One of the newsagents would act as a kind of a library, but you had to pay to borrow the books from him, and so we didn't get much reading, and we certainly hadn't many good books. But that gives you some idea what a newsboy had to do in those days, compared with the boys of today who have bicycles. We'd no bicycles in those days. You couldn't afford bicycles. In fact, I think there was only one lad who had a bicycle, and his father was in business in Liverpool and was a lot better off than any of the other boys' fathers, and that's the only reason he had a bike. And we were lucky if we could get a ride on his back step. You know, you don't know how fortunate you are today compared with those days. I mean, just fancy for a woman having to get up in the morning early, and she'd got to light a fire and get that fire nice and red and boil some water on that fire before they could even have a drink of tea. There was no just lighting the gas stove, because there's no such things as gas stoves. Not in our part of the country anyway. I don't know what there was in London or in any other towns, but certainly not round the Old or Prescott or anywhere like that. In fact, it wasn't till years later, till I think I was a young man before we even got just a single gas ring, and that was considered a marvellous thing, because it enabled them to boil a kettle in the morning without having to wait for the fire to burn up. But all the cooking was done on the fire. the oven cooking was done in that meant building a big fire up. You had to wait until the oven had got hot. And there was also bars in front of the fire that you could fry things. You could put a frying pan in front of the fire, or not exactly a frying pan, but something similar, that would hold sausages and bacon and that sort of thing, and it kind of fried it by putting it on in front of the fire. There was a kind of little thing that you could let down, so you could put your tray or roasting tin or anything like that on it and do things in front of the fire. And there was also a bar that would let down over the top of the fire from the side of the fireplace. And you put your pans on there to boil your potatoes or doing anything that had to be boiled had to be done on top of the fire, you see. And so it gives you some idea how hard it was for women in those days. There's one thing I ought to tell you, that round about the age of 9 or going into 10, something like that, I don't remember exactly, but it was evidently that our organist, Mr. Tom Berry, he was a young man, by the way. His father was the choir master, but he was quite a good organist too, this Tom Berry was. And he discovered that I'd got a voice. And of course I had sung like children do in little concerts that they have in relation to the Sunday school and at the Band of Hope. And even the Boys Brigade used to have their annual concert, and I'd sung there. And then it came, and then I sang solo in the Sunday school anniversary in the church. And I suppose it was then that the organist realised that I'd got a voice. And he took me up, and I used to have to go to his house and practice singing. And I remember the next anniversary that I had to sing, but instead of singing the usual anniversary songs, I had to sing two pieces that were classical pieces of that time. One was called Angels Ever Bright and Fair, and the other one was called The Children's Home. Well, this one called The Children's Home, it was really one that got people, because it was a story about two children. One belonged to some rich parents, and the other belonged to very poor parents. And I don't know whether I could recite it to you now. I've almost forgotten it. If I could just get the idea in my mind, I might do. Oh, it went like this. They played in their beautiful garden, the children of high degree. Outside the gates, the beggars passed on in their misery. But there was one of the children who couldn't join the play. And the poor little beggar maidens passed by him each day. This was, of course, about a little girl, one of the children who used to go past these rich people's houses and look in at the nice gardens. And then it goes on to say, once he had given her a flower, and oh, how pleased he was to see the frail white hands through the railing stretched out so eagerly. But she came again to the garden. She saw the children play, but the little white face had vanished, the little feet gone away. He was an invalid, this boy was, you see, rather sickly. So it goes on. She went away to her corner down by the restless stream. But all night long his face shone through her restless dream. And she herself was, this is an interlude, she herself was sickly, and it goes on, and this rich boy and the beggar maiden passed homewards side by side, meant they died that night. And then it finishes off, for the ways of men are narrow, but the gates of heaven are wide. And I know, of course, it ends up on a very high note on that last two lines, and it used to have people weeping. But it was very successful. But anyway, from that, this all this singing that I used to do with this Tom Berry, he formed a concert party. And there was a soprano and a contralto, and there was four brothers, the Williams brothers, and they had all the four voices. There were two tenors, a bass, and a baritone, and then there was me, who was billed as the boy soprano, and he used to take us to different places where we gave concerts, and I might say we kept on doing that until my voice broke when I was about just turned 15, I think, when my voice broke. I know it was a terrible loss to me to lose my voice and not be able to sing as I had been. Anyway, that's just as a side issue. When I started off this story, if you remember, I told you that something that happened when I was only a child of 2. And I think I mentioned that at that time we were living next door to the grocer's, Mrs. Seddon. Now, the house that we were living in belonged to a Mr. Seddon, and at the time that in the early days, anyway, perhaps before I was born, the old Mr. Seddon had a grocer's shop in Whiston, and he had a son named Bill Seddon, and this Bill Seddon looked after the shop at the Old, and at the time when we was living next door to Seddon's, he wasn't married, so he just had the shop and he just slept above the shop. But later on, he married a cousin of my father's, and of course, when he'd got married, they wanted somewhere to live apart from the shop. There wasn't enough room in the shop. So my parents got notice to quit because our house belonged to the Seddons, and so from there we had to move to a house that was right in front of the church, in a house called Church View. Well, the house wasn't called Church View. There was a row of houses of 4, and they were all called Church View. The address was just Church View the Old. That used to find us all right. And, most of my life from the age of about 3, of course, was spent in this house in Churchview, or either that or another one, which I'll tell you about just later on. Well, we were in this house that we moved to in Churchview, and this belonged to a solicitor who was practicing in Wales. So we were all right while he was practicing in Wales, and he was a married man and he'd got a family, but he didn't want the house himself because he'd moved to Wales for his practice. But anyway, what happened was that later on, perhaps about 5 or 6 years later on, he decided, well, he wasn't doing too well, as a matter of fact, in his practice in Wales, so he decided to move back to a practice in Prescott, the nearby town. So when he came back, he wanted somewhere to live, and as we were living in his house, of course, we had to get out again to let him come in the house. But he was very considerate, and he said he actually owned all the 4 houses, you see, and he said if any of the houses came empty, he would give us the first opportunity to take for the tenancy. And of course that's really what happened, because we had to get out, and we had to go into a house in the Dragon, this place called the Dragon, which was a bit past the Holt on the way to Prescott. But this house at the Dragon, it wasn't really suitable at all. No garden and anything, but apart from that, it was only 2 bedrooms. And at that time, my mother had about, well, there was about at least 6 children. And even then, it might have been 7 even. I think there was 7. So a 2-bedroom house with 7 children and a grandfather living with us as well. You can tell how we were. And I can always remember the first night we slept there, because my mother and father were in the front bedroom with the youngest children, and there was my grandfather and we older children were in the back bedroom, and all at once the bed that we were sleeping in, one of the legs of the bed went through the ceiling. So it can give you some idea what those kind of houses were like. And of course, there was nothing else at the time, so we had to put up with it. And it was while we were there that I got scarlet fever. And I remember my mother, she was very considerate about us children, although she'd got such a large family. But she wouldn't let me go into the isolation hospital, so I had to go and sleep with them in the front bedroom. Not in their bed, of course. They put a special bed up for me. But it was about, of course, scarlet fever in those days. It was fairly serious. And you were really ill for about first week. And then the thing was all your skin peeled off, and you had to wait until all the skin had finished peeling off and you got a new skin. So that it was about 6 weeks before you got back to school again. And this all happened while we were at the Dragon. But luckily, one of the tenants in Mr. Wright's houses that we'd been in before, at this juncture, had got a fresh job in Liverpool and moved away. And Mr. Wright kept his promise and gave us the first chance, so we moved back to Churchview, but not in the same house, but the house that we did move back into, well, my father and mother lived in that until they both died. And in fact, my youngest sister actually owns that particular house and is living in it today. And I can't remember much of when I was in Standard 4 at school. I know it was just the usual things happening that happen to any boy. But by the time I got in Standard 5, without any boasting, I had developed into a sharp boy, pretty clever in schoolwork. And in those days, I don't know how they do today in school, but in those days you got marks for if it was geography and you had to write about different lands and all that sort of thing, or history, or whatever it was, whatever subject you were learning at school, you got marks at the end of it. The teacher came and gave you so many out of 10. And then at the end of the week, all the marks were added up, and the one with the highest marks was the top of the class, as they called it. And in winter, this was very useful because if you were at the top of the class, you sat nearest the fire. And as there was only open fires in those days, you were very glad of that. But as I say, I developed into a fairly sharp boy, and more often than not, I ended up at the top of the class each week. And but although I ended up at the top of the class, I had to leave school at 13 because my parents, having a big family, they needed some money from the children who were growing up, some earnings. In fact, it was the usual thing amongst the working class. Although the school leaving age was 14, they were lucky if they could stay at school till they were 14. Most of them left at the age of 13. Mind you had to apply to be allowed to leave, and you had to have attained a certain standard at school, otherwise you wouldn't get permission to leave. And another thing, you had to have someone who would sign that they would employ you for that year, from when you were 13 to when you were 14. And you couldn't leave that person's employ until you were 14. You were tied to them. So as I had an uncle who was a butcher, he signed that he would take me on as a butcher's boy, and that was my first job. But just before leaving school, from our school, there was just two of the pupils each year that could win. It was possible for them to win a scholarship to go to a higher school called Cowley, it was even higher than a grammar school. It was one of those places where some of the pupils paid, but there's certain open seats for children whose parents couldn't afford to pay for them to go. But I know the head teacher, Mr. Tomlinson, wanted me to sit for this examination, but my parents couldn't afford to let me go, so I had to turn it down. But I did sit for what was called the merit exam, and my butcher uncle, he allowed me a week off from my work to go back and sit for this merit examination. And I might say that at this time it was then I got to know your mother more than I'd known her when she was younger. Mind you, I had known her, but she was in the same class as me all the time, being a mixed class, and she was just a little bit older than me, but not a year older. And she was Edie Lyon then, and I knew Edie Lyon well, and she was pretty clever as well. In fact, she stayed on till she was 14. But I had to go and start work then. I'll tell you more about my job as a butcher's boy next time in a few minutes. Or, well, it might be a few hours, I don't know, or it might even be a few days, just when I've got the time again. Now, about that butcher's boy's job. First of all, I'll give you some idea of the hours we used to work in those days. I used to start at 8 o'clock in the morning and work till 8 at night, because there was no strict hours that shops had to be shut. The shops could stay open as long as they liked, and there was no hours governing young people's hours of work in those days. There was with regard to factories, but not jobs outside, like same as a butcher's boy or anything like that, where the job wasn't confined to a factory. In a factory, their hours were limited, but not with a job of this kind. But as I say, it was 8 o'clock to 8. And then on a Friday, which was usually busy because people were coming for their weekend meat, on a Friday it was 8 o'clock till 11 o'clock at night. And on Saturday, it was 8 o'clock in the morning till midnight, because, you see, there were no refrigerators in those days to keep the meat fresh. And they used to have to bring the meat from the abattoir in Liverpool. Most of them did, the butchers in Prescott anyway. They didn't kill their own, they didn't. And they'd go and get the meat in on a Thursday for the weekend, and of course they didn't want to have any meat standing about over the weekend, especially in summer, because they didn't know a way of keeping it fresh. So they used to keep open till midnight on Saturday, hoping they'd sell out. And what they didn't sell was usually made into sausages or made into sausage meat. But anyway, those were the kind of hours that I started working on. We were supposed to have one afternoon off, and that was usually Monday. But before we could leave, we had to do a lot of work in the shop. It had to be cleaned, everywhere had to be scrubbed, because the baskets that we used to carry the meat in had to be scrubbed. All the inside of the shop